Shri Rajalakshmi Prakashan published. A textbook on fundamentals of agronomy 1. Authors: Dr. D. N. Jagtap, Dr. P. B. Pawar, Dr. U. V. Mahadkar. Chapter 14. Weeds, its definition, characteristics of weeds, merits and demerits of weeds, classification of weeds, meaning of crop weed competition and its period in different crops. Definition: weed is an unwanted plant or a plant out of place or plant growing where it is not wanted. Weeds are undesirable, ugly, unwanted plants, often prolific and persistent, noxious and harmful in potentialities. Weed is a plant growing where it is not desired or a plant out of place. Weeds are recognized worldwide as an important type of undesirable economic pest. A plant growing out of place, that is a plant growing where it is not wanted, is common, accepted explanation of what a weed is. The definition given by WSSA appears to describe weeds more sufficiently, which states weed as any plant that is objectionable or interferes with the activities or welfare of a man. Weeds are a concern of everyone and not just agriculturists. Weeds are a nuisance in crop production, forestry, aquatic ecosystem, public amenity areas, industrial establishments, grasslands, etc. Characteristics of weeds. The weed's seed germinate early, and the seedlings grow faster. They, being hardy, compete with the crop plants and deprive them of light, moisture and nutrients. They flower earlier, run to seed in profusion and mature ahead of the crop. They are, therefore, difficult to control, and it may be even impossible to eradicate some weeds completely. They are unuseful, unwanted and undesirable. They are harmful to crops, cattle and human beings. They can survive even under adverse conditions. They are prolific and have a very high reproductive capacity. Viability of seeds remains intact, even if they are buried deep in the soil. The seeds may have special structures like wings, spines, hooks, sticky hairs, etc., on account of which they can be easily disseminated over long distance. Many weeds like doob are vegetatively propagated and spread rapidly all over the field even under adverse conditions. Merits and demerits of weeds. Weeds, when plowed under, add nutrients. Many weeds have a luxuriant leafy growth, and when buried in soil as green manure, add considerable amount humus and plant nutrients in the soil. Weeds like bavchi, Sorelia coralifolia, Gokhru, Xanthium strumarium, captain about 3.0 to 3.5% nitrogen on dry weight basis. Example: Takla, Shevra, etc. Weed check wind or water erosion. When grown in desert soils or on sloppy lands in heavy rainfall areas, weeds may help in checking wind or water erosion. Example: all Poaceae family members. Weeds are useful as fodder. Certain weeds like doob, Cynodon dactylon, and grasses serve as forage for cattle. Weeds have medicinal values. A large number of weeds are used in the preparation of certain drugs or medicines. Example: Gumma lessicas aspera is used in snake bite. All of Pivaladhotra, Arjmon mexicana, is useful against skin diseases. Weeds have economic importance. Amaranthus virid, Cassia tora, Costus species, etc. used for vegetable purpose. Cassia tora, Cassia sericea, Alizicarpus rugosus, etc. are used for green manure purpose. Cons, Suchurum spontaneum, is used for thatching purposes. Lavla, Cyperus rotundus, for making adbates, and lemongrass for aromatic oils. Reclamation of alkali lands. Weeds like Pivaladhotra, Arjmon mexicana, is useful for reclaiming alkali lands. Weeds serve as ornamental plants. Some weed species bear very beautiful and attractive flowers. Example: Ghaneri, Lantana camera, and are used as ornamental plants or hedges in gardens. Weed secretions are harmful. Heavy growth of certain weed like quackgrass, Agropyron repens, or Gath lavla, Cyperus rotundus, lower the germination and reduce the growth of many crop plants. This is said to be due to the presence of certain phytotoxins in these weeds. Demerits. Disadvantages of weeds. Reduction in crop yield. Weeds compete with crops for water, nutrients and light. Being hardy and vigorous in growth habit, they soon outgrow the crops and consume large amounts of water and nutrients, thus causing heavy losses in yields. Increase in the cost of cultivation. Tillage operations are done to control weeds, and it is generally estimated that on an average about 30% of the total expenditure for crop production is on tillage operations. Hand weeding, herbicides application, mechanical weeding etc. also increases the cost of production. The quality of the field produce is reduced. When the crop is harvested from a weedy field, the seeds of weeds get mixed with the main crop and consequently the quality of the produce is lowered. It is common experience to find seeds of weeds in wheat, gram etc., which are brought to the market for sale. Similarly, bundles of many leafy vegetables like methi or palak contain green plants of weeds. Such produce fetches less price in the market. Sheep wools attach with the seeds of Urina lobta, chicta, and flowers of Themeda quadrivolvis, wool grass, are reduce the quality of the wool. Weed harbor insect pests and diseases. Weeds either give shelter to various insect pests and diseases, or serve as alternate hosts and thus help in perpetuating the menace from pests and diseases. Crop rice, pest diseases, stem borer, alternate host, weeds. Echinocloa colonna, pakhat. Echinocloa cruzgalli, wide rice. Panicum spp. Crop madge, pest diseases, downy mildew. Alternate host, weeds Saccharum spontaneum, wild sugarcane. Crop red gram, pest diseases, gram caterpillar. Alternate host, weeds. Amaranthus spp, math. Datura inoxia, white dhotra. Crop wheat, pest diseases, black rust. Alternate host, weeds Agropyron repens, grack grass. Weeds check the flow of water in irrigation channels. Weeds block drainage and check the flow of water in irrigation canals and field channels, thereby increasing the seepage losses as well as losses through overflowing. The irrigation efficiency is also reduced. Example: Evolvulus alsinoids. Weeds are harmful to human beings. Besides being injurious to the health of cattle, certain weeds cause irritation of skin, allergy and poisoning in human beings. Example: Parthenium hysterophorus, Mimosa pudica. Health problem number 1. Asthma, dermatitis, skin allergy, fever. Weeds, Parthenium hysterophorus, pollen of Ambrosia trifida. Health problem number 2. Malaria, encephalitis and filaria caused by mosquito. Weeds, aquatic weed like Salvinia molestra, Pistia lanceolate. Weeds cause quicker wear and tear of farm implements. Being hardy and deep-rooted, the tillage implements get worn out early and can't work efficiently unless they are properly sharpened. Weeds reduce the value of the land. Agricultural lands, which are heavily infested with perennial weeds like Cons, Saccharum spontaneum, Parthenium hysterophorus, Hyptis swarvulens etc. always fetch less price, because such lands cannot be brought under cultivation without incurring heavy expenditure on labor and machinery. Classification of weeds. Point first. According to life cycle, ontogeny. According to life cycle, there are 3 types of weeds, which are as annual weeds, biannual weeds and perennial weeds. Number 1. Annual weeds. They complete their life cycle within 1 year or 1 season. Kharif annuals. Kharif weeds. They appear with the onset of monsoon, June, July, and complete their life cycle when rainy season is over, October or Nov. Example: Coxcomb, Dudhi, Math, Chimanchara, Gazar Gavat, all Posi members etc. Rabi annuals. Rabi weeds, they complete their life cycle during winter season, October Nov to Feb. Example: Canopodium album, Ghol, Portulaca oleracea, wild oat, etc. Summer annuals. Summer weeds, they complete their life cycle during summer season, Feb to May. Majority of the Kharif season weeds grow during summer season in irrigated farming. Example: Parthenium hysterophorus, Amaranthus spp, Euphorbia spp, Dudhi, etc. Ephemerals. The short-lived annual weeds are called ephemerals. Example: Philanthus neruri. This weed completes its life cycle within a very short period of 2 to 4 weeks. Number 2. Biennial weeds. They take at least 2 years or 2 seasons to complete their life cycle. They complete their vegetative growth in first year or season and produce flowers and seeds in the next year or season. Example: wild carrot, Docas carota, wild onion, Asphodilus spp, Bhamrud, Blumia lacera, Jwalamukhi, Molugu pentaphylla. Number 3. Perennial weeds. They continue to grow for more than 2 years or several years. The new shoots develop from the underground vegetative parts like roots, rhizomes, tubers, stolons and bulbs at appropriate time. No I. Simple perennial. They are mostly reproduced by seed. They are easy to control. Example: wild bear, Ghaneri. No 2. Creeping perennial. They are reproduce vegetative parts like creeping root, stolons, rhizome and tubers in addition to their seed. Once they established, they are difficult to control. Example: Hariyali, Lavla. Point second. According to habitat, place of occurrence. Cropped land weeds. Example: Chandwil, Striga, Orobench, wild rice, etc. Pastures and grazing land weeds. Example: Parthenium, Pivalitivan, Cleome viscus. Weeds along water channel. Example: Jalkumbhi, water hyacinth, Pandhari fuli, Lagaska mollis. Roadside weeds. Example: Chakore or Takla, Cassia tora, Gokhru, Xanthium strumarium, Gazar gavat, Parthenium hysterophorus. Waste land weeds. Example: Acacia sp, Ziziphus spp, Lajlu, Mimosa pudica, etc. Lawn and garden weeds. Example: Cannabis sativa, Ambushi, Ghol, crabgrass, Digitaria ciliaris. Forest weeds. Example: Ghaneri, Lantana camera, Fool gavat, Themida quadrivolvis. Point third. According to association or dependence on other host. Number 1. Crop-bound weeds or parasitic weeds. Stem parasite. Example: Amarville or Dodder cuscuta reflexa. It is complete parasite, Loranthus on mango. Root parasite. Example: Striga spp on jowar, madge, bajra and sugarcane. Bambakhu Orobench spp on tobacco. Number 2. Independent or crop-associated weeds. These weeds grows in association with particular crop, but they do not depend on host crop for food material. They absorb plant nutrients and water from soil and prepare their own food material. Example: Chandwil, Ipomia spp in sugarcane. Mimicry, weeds with similar morphological characters, similar stem and foliage, like the crop associated, is called mimicry. Example: wild oat, Avena fatua, in wheat and barley crop. Wild rice, Echinocloa coluna and Echinocloa crusculi, in rice crop. Number 3. Season-bound weeds. The season-bound weeds grow in a specific season of the year with disregard to the crop species cultivated. These weeds may be either summer annuals or winter annuals. Point fourth. According to soil type. Weeds of black soil. Example: Hariyali, Kunda, Kans, Ghol, Gazar gavat, etc. Weeds of sandy loam or light soils. Example: Agda, Dudhani, Coxcomb, Ranmodi, Rantulas, Lajlu, Bala Tokadar, etc. Weeds of ill-drained soils, example. Nut grass, maca, etc. Weeds in tanks and ponds or aquatic weeds, jalkumbhi, water hyacinth, typha, punkanis, salvinia spp, lotus, etc. Point fifth. According to plant family. Gramínea, hariali, kunda, chimanchara, etc. Solanaceae, wild brinjal, kateli or Kate ringani, kapalfodi, white dhotra, etc. Euphorbiaceae, all dudhi, deepmal, etc. Lamiaceae, goma, ran tulsi. Convolvulaceae, chandvel, amarvel, garvel, morning glory, etc. Leguminosae, lajlu, shevra, takla. Asteraceae, osadi, chitta, maca, gazargavat, ranmudi, etc. Amaranthaceae, Kate math, tandulja, kunzaru, etc. Canopodaceae, vasant whale. Portulacaceae, ghol. Camelinaceae, kena, camelina spp. Cyperaceae, nutgrass or nutsedge, Kellinga sedga, fimbristil, etc. Point 6. Morphological classification or according to cotyledon's character or seed type. Monocote weeds or grasses, these are narrow leaf weeds or grasses. Example. Hariali, kunda, chimanchara, etc. Dicot weeds, these are broad leaf weeds. Example. Takla, shevra, etc. Sedges, weeds belonging to family Cyperaceae. Example. Nutgrass or nutsedge, algae, observed in rice fields. Ferns, example. Water fern, Salvinia spp, in lowland rice. Point 7. According to nature of stem. Woody weeds, these are the woody and semi-woody, rough stem shrubs and are collectively called brush weeds. Example. Acacia, wild bear, ghaneri, lantana camara, etc. Herbaceous weeds, these weeds have green and succulent stem and common occurrence on farmlands. Example. Math, coxcomb, dudhi, gazar gavat, etc. Point 8. According to the origin of weeds. Introduced or exotic weeds, alien weeds or anthrophytes, many weeds move from the place of their origin by seeds or other parts to a new area and establish there and become introduced weeds. Such introduced weeds are called alien weeds or anthrophytes. Example. Parthenium hysterophorus and Solnum corolensis, from USA with food grains. Lantana camara, ghaneri from Sri Lanka by birds. Cocklebur gokhru, Xanthium strumerium, from native of America. Orobench spp, bambakhu, from Europe. Cactus, Opentia spp, from Western Hemisphere. Nutgrass, Cyperus rotundus, and Chandvel from Eurasia. Water hyacinth from tropical America, introduced in India by Portuguese. Johnson grass from Asia and southern Europe. Indigenous weeds, origin of majority of tropical weeds is India. Example. Coxcomb, dudhi, agda, hariali, etc. Point 9. Facultative and obligate weeds. Facultative weeds or apophytes, weeds which grows primarily in undisturbed or close communities but may sometimes escape to the cultivated fields. It is also called apophytes. Example. Cactus, obligate weeds, weeds which grows or occurs primarily in cultivated field where the land is disturbed frequently. Example. Chandvel, Convolvulus arvensis. Point 10. Noxious weeds. The weeds which are undesirable, troublesome and difficult to control are called noxious weeds. Example. Nutgrass, hariali, parthenium, striga, orobench, water hyacinth, etc. Point 11. Objectionable weeds. Weeds which produce seeds that are difficult to separate once mixed with crop seeds are called objectionable weeds. Example. The mixture of Argemone mexicana, Pivala dhotra, seeds in mustard. Wild onion in cultivated onion. Point 12. Industrial weeds. Weeds invading areas around buildings, highways, railway lines, fence rows, electric and telephone pole bases etc. are called industrial weeds. Example: Parthenium, Reshinkata, Katimat etc. Point 13. Poisonous weeds. Example: Gazar Gavat, Datura, poison ivy, Ras SPP, etc. Meaning of crop weed competition and its period in different crops. Crop weed competition. Plants require nutrients, water, light and carbon dioxide for growth. Light and carbon dioxide are used by the leaves. Competition for these growth factors is, therefore, above the ground. The competition for nutrients and water is below the ground as these are absorbed by roots. Even at low population of weeds, competition is set in at 3-leaf stage of weeds. Among the growth factors, light and nutrients are very important in reducing growth. Competition for nutrients. Competition for nutrients constitutes an important aspect of weed crop competition. Competition may occur for all nutrients required for plant growth. Weeds usually absorb mineral nutrients faster than many of our crop plants and accumulate them in their tissues in relatively larger amount. The nutrient concentration in weeds far exceeds the associated crops. Weed biomass may account for 50% of the total biomass in match field, causing around 64 to 83% of nutrients locked up in weeds. In groundnut, the nutrients absorbed by weeds are considerable, especially phosphorus and potassium, which are more than 80% of total nutrients absorbed by the crop and its associated weeds. It is a common experience that crops infested with weeds show N deficiency. Certain weeds not only cause depletion of soil nitrogen by their absorption, but also induce nitrification. Nutsedge exudes perfumed carbon compounds into the soil, which enhances the multiplication of denitrifying bacteria. Competition for light. Plant height and vertical leaf area distribution define effective components of the competitive struggle for light. It becomes most important element of weed crop competition when moisture and nutrients in soil are plentiful, and weeds have an edge over crop plants in respect of their height. Light competition may commence very early in the crop season if a dense weed growth smothers the crop seedlings. Crops like cotton, potato, several vegetables, sugarcane etc. are prone to heavy weed growths at their seedling stages and consequently suffer badly at the hands of shading effects of weeds. An important feature of competition for light in plant communities is that unlike competition for N and moisture, once the crop seedlings are shaded by weeds, later on providing additional solar energy cannot make up for the crop stunting caused earlier. Generally, weeds grow faster and shade the crop plants if not checked. Even in case of shorter weeds, the lower leaves of crops are shaded by them. Weeds deplete photosynthetically active radiation, resulting in reduction in photosynthesis and shortening the life of lower leaves. There are instances where Amaranthus hybridus reduced the photon flux density, reaching the cotton canopy by 90% at midday. The light intensity reaching match leaves may be only around 56 to 63% in cloudy weather and 50 to 57% in sunny weather due to interference of tall plants of sorghum hairpins. Due to shading, crop plants may have thin, pale green leaves with reduced number of vascular bundles and meristem cells. Competition for moisture. Weed crop competition for moisture usually occurs along with other elements of competition. It becomes increasingly critical with increasing soil moisture stress. In general, for producing equal dry matter, weeds transpire more water than do most of our crop plants. Therefore, in dryland agriculture, the actual evapotranspiration from the weedy crop fields is much more than the evapotranspiration from the weed-free crop field. The amount of water required to produce a unit amount of dry matter is known as transpiration ratio. The transpiration ratio of weeds is high compared to crops. The transpiration ratio of Cynodon dactylon is around 813 compared to 450 for pearl millet and 430 for sorghum. This indicates that more water is required to grow 1 ton of weeds than 1 ton of crop. Weeds consume valuable stored soil moisture from fallow fields. Weeds growing in fallow fields consume as much as 7 to 12 hectare cm of soil moisture, which is sufficient to produce 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms per hectare of grain sorghum in the following season. Competition for carbon dioxide. Competition for carbon dioxide may occur when the weed infestation is high. Since most of the weeds are C4 plants, they can deplete carbon dioxide to a very low level compared to crops. When carbon dioxide content increase artificially from 350 ppm to 700 ppm, the competitive ability of C3 crop like soybean increased compared to its associated C4 weed, namely sorghum hailpins. Critical period of weed crop competition. The critical period of weed crop completion is defined as that shortest time span in the ontogeny of crop when weeding will result in the highest economic returns. The crop yield levels obtained by managing the weeds during this period should provide crop yields sufficiently close to those obtained by the full season freedom from weeds. Unfortunately, most farmers assume that removing weeds any time during the growing season was good enough for obtaining full benefits of weeding in terms of increased crop yields. But contrary to its substantial scientific evidences are now available which show beyond doubt that the time of weeding a crop is as important as the weeding itself. A fundamental principle of plant ecology is that early occupants of the ground tend to discourage or exclude the later ones. This holds good also in agriculture. The weeds that germinate either before or along the crop offer stronger competition to it than the later germinating ones. It has been observed that early weeds accumulate dry matter faster than the crop seedlings. In maize, for instance, it has been found that during the initial period of 2 to 3 weeks after crop emergence, weeds complete about 15 to 18% of their full season growth, while the crop plants accomplish only 2 to 3% of it. Several such observations have favored need of early season weeding in most of the annual crops. In general, there is hypothesis that for producing optimum yields the annual crops require a weed-free respite for the first a quarter to one-third of their growing period. Longer duration weed control usually did not give additional economic production. Vegetables are highly susceptible to dense growth of weeds which they encounter from their emergence time. In onion, even an initial 2 weeks competition from weeds can throttle the bulk growth. In several other transplanted vegetables, an initial 4 weeks after planting period is considered critical in this respect. In okra, weeding must begin 3 weeks after sowing, and the crop should be kept weed-free up to another 3 weeks. In cucumber, 12 to 36 days period after crop emergence was found critical for completion from weeds. In irrigated sunflower, weeding was found essential up to 4 weeks after emergence of the crop. For each crop situation there is a critical period of weed crop competition, and that this period lies somewhere in the early period of crop growth. In general, the need for early weeding in fields crops, it should not be misinterpreted to advocate weeding as soon as the first weed appeared in the field. Generally, period of 30 to 45 days after sowing is considered as critical for competition from weed. The critical period of crop weed competition is given as follow: S.R. Reddy. Crop cereals. Direct seeded rice, critical period, Das, 15 to 45. Transplanted rice, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Wheat, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Maj, critical period, Das, 15 to 45. Sorghum, critical period, Das, 15 to 45. Pearl millet, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Crop pulses. Pigeon pea, critical period, Das, 15 to 60. Green gram, critical period, Das, 15 to 30. Black gram, critical period, Das, 15 to 30. Cowpea, critical period, Das, 15 to 30. Chickpea, critical period, Das, 30 to 60. Peas, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Lentil, critical period, Das, 30 to 60. Crop all seeds. Soybean, critical period, Das, 20 to 45. Groundnut, critical period, Das, 30 to 50. Sunflower, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Castor, critical period, Das, 30 to 60. Safflower, critical period, Das, 15 to 45. Sesame, critical period, Das, 15 to 45. Rapeseed mustard, critical period, Das, 15 to 40. Linseed, critical period, Das, 20 to 45. Crop commercial crops. Sugarcane, critical period, Das, 30 to 120. Potato, critical period, Das, 20 to 40. Cotton, critical period, Das, 15 to 60. Jute, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Crop vegetables. Cauliflower, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Cabbage, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Okra, critical period, Das, 15 to 30. Tomato, critical period, Das, 30 to 45. Onion, critical period, Das, 30 to 75.
We politely request, please like, share and subscribe our channel Sri Raj Lakshmi Publication.